Hello, my name is Philip Bloom and I'm going to show you how to use the video mode of this camera here, the Canon 7D, to its fullest potential. Whether you've used a previous video DSLR, or perhaps you're a stills guy who's never touched the video mode, or perhaps you're somebody who's used video cameras but never touched one of these before, in this DVD I'm going to show you everything you need to know. You may have noticed loads of stuff on this table, and this is just a fraction of the stuff that I carry around with me. We don't have the lenses here, we don't have the support, we obviously don't have the bag, but some of this stuff I have found to be absolutely key to getting the absolute best out of the camera, whether it's to record sound, to get focus, to control the light, to keep the camera going. But first off, I'm going to show you one of the most key things out of this, and simply is the compact flash cards, because without these you can't record onto anything. Now I do recommend getting at least 133 times speed, and I've got some different size cards here. I have 16s and I have 32s, and really to try and have at least, I would say, 5 16 gig cards as a minimum to carry around with you, because you don't want to start offloading stuff during the day and then wiping your cards. That should get you through a whole day. On that same topic, also make sure you have enough of these batteries. Now there's 5 batteries here. Some people may say that's a bit excessive, but this camera really does eat them up. I found that I've gone through 6 in one day quite easily, and I've had to charge up during the day. Now that's not an easy thing to do. So make sure enough cards and enough batteries. Now I've spent 20 odd years using video cameras, and recording sound in camera has never been a problem for me until I started using video DSLRs, and the 7D is no exception to this rule. It does have huge limitations when recording sound. The main problem is there's no way of actually putting a professional mic input into this. The only mic input we have is a very simple mic input, which is a 3.5mm stereo jack. Not ideal. Now on camera microphone, we do have a very simple mono mic on here. It's just literally 4 little openings and that's your microphone. It's okay for the most basic sound recording, but if there's any wind and if you want to record anybody really talking properly, it's very thin, very tinny, and really not very good. That is why on top of here I have this Rode video mic, which is really good for getting that sort of shotgun style sound. Again, it still plugs in via your simple mini jack, but it gives you much better quality sound. Now later on in this DVD, there's going to be a whole chapter about how to record sound separately using an external device like this one here, which is the Zoom H4n recorder, and some external microphones. Now this is probably the easiest part of setting up the camera, and that's simply turning it on. We have an on and off switch here. We turn it on, and fingers crossed it will start up. There we go. Now the great thing about the 7D is it doesn't need setting up for live mode. It's automatically got a live mode because there's a dedicated button up inside here. So what I want to do though is set up the ISO and the actual picture profile so you can get the best out of the camera. So first off, we press menu, scroll along to my menu settings, register a new setting. I'm going to scroll down all the way to almost there. ISO expansion, select that, click OK. Come out of that, and again, and it's now in my menu setting. So click ISO expansion, select on. So when we come out of the menu, click ISO, we have loads more options for our different ISO settings. To set the picture profile in menu, we just scroll down to picture style. We're going to use one of the user-defined settings, number 1. I'm going to click on info, and we're going to change the sharpness, knock it down to 0. Same with the contrast, and knock the saturation down 2 notches. Next thing we need to do is come out of that, scroll all the way along back to the My Menu settings. There it is, My Menu settings, register a new setting, scroll all the way down until we get to highlight tone priority. select that, register that, come out of the menu, and now select highlight tone priority and make that enable. Now, what this does, it gives the image a very flat looking look to it, which is great because we can grade it and do things with it in post. It's a lot flatter than the standard settings. What I'm going to do is stop it, go into menu, select standard. Okay, roll on that. So you'll be able to see the two shots side by side. It's a very nice looking image, it's very rich, it's got some nice crushed blacks and saturation is very nice, but it gives us very little to play with in the grade. So that's why I recommend using the setting that we programmed under user defined 1. Because the thing is, you can easily take this flat looking image and make it look just like the standard looking image just by changing it in the color grade. Now, the one downside to highlight tone priority is it does limit your ISO options. So if we click on the ISO button, you'll notice that some of them are grayed out. We don't really care too much about 12,800, we'll never use that, but we've lost 100. Let me just bring that up again. We've lost 100, 125 and 160, so our minimum ISO is now 200. So if it's key that you have ISO 100, you can easily take the highlight tone priority off just by going into that and clicking on disable, click back on ISO, and we have all our options again. Now, looking at this contraption, you may think, what on earth is all of this? Well, these are a number of devices I use to help me get focus. You don't need to use all of these all of the time, but a combination of these things really does help. And I'm going to break them down one by one. The simplest way to get focus is simply by using the LCD panel of the 7D and just focusing with the focus barrel of the lens. And to help you get the focus points you want, you can use the zoom in button, which is up here. Now, what I want to get in focus is actually Kevin, who's over here. And as you can see, this square is the point which is going to zoom into. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the square over to Kevin. There we go. And then zoom in. That's 10 times zoom in, from 5 times to 10 times, until I get focus. Press it again, comes out, and I've got focus. Now, this is very fiddly. You don't want to do this every time you do a shot, and that is why we use different accessories to help us get this. This is the Zacuto Follow Focus, and I've used the Follow Focus on pretty much every video camera that I've used. I find it really essential in getting that pinpoint accuracy, especially on anything that's narrative. And the way it works is very simple. We have the lens gear, which is simply attached onto the lens barrel itself here. And what we do is we simply get the Follow Focus in, so the gear wheel attaches to the gear, and we can control the focus from the Follow Focus. As you can see, by turning this wheel here, the lens barrel itself is moving. Now, how does this help you get focus? I will show you. What I'm going to do is get my focus on Kevin. I'm going to zoom in, get my focus on him, and that is point A, which is here. Let me just get my wiper, dry wipe, to work properly. There we are. That is my point A, and I'm going to find my point B, which is here, there, and that's point B. So now what we do is we simply focus by going to our start point, which is point A, and turning the focus wheel to point B to getting our focus. Now, there is still some vibration coming from my hand onto the actual body of the camera and the lens, because we're on quite an unsteady ground here. And this is where another accessory comes in really handy. If I can get Joe to come in, Joe has with him a whip, and a whip is a very useful accessory because it goes into the Follow Focus and gives you the ability to pull focus from a distance, reducing the amount of wobble you're getting on the lens because you're not holding it and transferring it into the lens, you're doing it from a distance. But not just that, because when you're pulling focus normally, you're having to look at the focus marks rather than the screen, which is fine because you're going to get focus, but if you want to monitor the shot for actually anything happening in it, you're concentrating on this rather than the actual screen. So that is where a focus puller comes in handy, and Joe is going to be my focus puller. So I'm going to roll on the shot, and Joe's going to pull focus from A to B. So he's not looking at a monitor, he's simply looking at the focus marks and pulling focus from those two positions. And he's getting it pinpoint accurate each time, and I'm able to check the shot and make sure what's going on in frame is exactly what I want. This way you can maintain your focus accuracy and get the shot right. Now, you don't always have the ability to have a focus puller, sometimes you have to do it on your own, but now I have somebody here, it makes it a lot easier. For me, the very best way to get focus is to use a monitor. I've got the Marshall one here, but there are some limitations when using a monitor, but it's still the very best way to get focusing and to monitor your shot. Now, let me turn it on and I'll show you the issues we can have. Okay, we start her up. And what we do is we take the HDMI lead, which is plugged into the monitor, and plug it into the HDMI socket on here. There we go. Now what happens is we lose the display of the LCD screen and it comes up onto the monitor. As you notice, we have a very large black border. Now we can lose part of that black border by pressing the info button, but now we lose all of our actual shooting information, so we really don't know what our exposure and shutter is at without looking at the top LCD screen of the camera. So you have to decide what's more important to you, whether you want to see the information on the screen or you'd like it to be bigger in frame. But it still doesn't fill the whole frame even there. But the great thing is when you hit record, it doesn't change aspect ratio. It stays the same as it is. And there we go, we can just pull focus onto the tree and then back onto Kevin. And when we play that shot back, and click on info, we go full screen, which is lovely to show your director or just for yourself to see how the shot looks. Lovely full screen HD image. The problem is when using the monitor is we've lost the LCD screen, so we have to use this for ourselves for all our monitoring purposes, which means the director themselves can't have a monitor. The only way around that is to get a powered HDMI splitter and have two monitors. If you simply have a normal splitter that goes into two outputs, it won't work. It needs to be powered. There are loads of monitors out there. This is probably one of the more expensive models out there, but it is very good because it gives you extra features that the cheaper ones don't have. First off, the resolution is very, very high. It matches pretty much the resolution of the actual camera. Also, when we go into live mode, it gives us a very cool function which helps us get focus, which is called peaking. So I press this button here and it goes black and white. We now have these red edges which shows us what's in focus, and as I turn it onto the tree, see the tree becomes in focus. It shows me that's in focus, that's not, and it's a great way of helping you get your focus, and this is only available on the more expensive monitors. One final thing I love about this monitor is all the monitors I've used in the past throughout the 20 years I've been doing this is you need to have a sunshade. I have no sunshade on this monitor, and we've got sunshine around us, we're outside in daylight, and I can perfectly see the screen because it has an anti-reflective coating. It really is a really fantastic monitor to use on location. Now you may be wondering, what on earth do I have around my neck all this time? It's not some sort of new trendy man necklace. It is in fact a Z finder, or as Americans call it, a Z finder. And it basically turns the LCD screen into a very, very cool viewfinder. For all those video users out there who are missing their viewfinder, we now have one. What it does, it magnifies the LCD screen 3 times into your eye, so you have equivalent of a really huge screen in your eye. You can adjust the focusing depending on your eyesight with the red dial, and that's the diopter. And when you put your eye to it, you can then get focus much easier than just looking at the LCD screen without one. Now the downside to this is it has to be at the same level as you, or you have to squat down or peek up into it. So if it's at an awkward angle, it's quite difficult. But then you can easily just take it off, put it around your neck with this strappy lanyard type thing, and you can use the LCD screen again. This really is an essential part of shooting, especially when shooting handheld. Now, when trying to get the optimum film motion, you need to keep your shutter at double the frame rate you're shooting at. I'm shooting at 30p, so that means I need to shoot at 1/60th of a second. If I was shooting at 24p, this camera doesn't actually have 1/48th of a second, but the closest I've got to it is 1/50th. If I'm shooting 25p, again, I would shoot 1/50th. When you go up to your 720p frame rates, 50p and 60p, again, it's 1/100th of a second, and when you're shooting 60p, there is no 1/120th, you have to go 1/125th of a second. That is to get the optimum film motion, that's double the frame rate. Now, if you wanted to get some certain effects, yes, you can put more shutter in, and I'm going to show you what happens when you put loads of shutter by using Vodmarie here on a swing. And I'm going to roll on that, and I'm going to ask her to start swinging away from me. I've got 1/2000th of a second shutter in, so it's very fast shutter. If you really put some welly into it, go on. Come on. More, more. So it does give it a nice different look, but I'm going to show you what it looks like when we shoot it at 1/60th. So I've now dropped down to 1/60th of a second, and you can see the movement is a lot smoother. Now I've come out of the lovely comfort of the shade into the very bright sunshine of the Florida sun to show you about how to get exposure and how to control exposure. First off, what I like to do is to remap the buttons, which is a function of the 7D, and it's really very nice. I like to have the actual aperture control on the top here rather than preset down here, so it's closer to the lens. It feels more like an actual lens aperture, and to do that you simply press the info button until we get onto this screen here, press the Q button, and then we can scroll down to the bottom right, which is custom controls. We select that and we can change the buttons that we want to remap, and I've actually already done it here. I have remapped the front dial to be the aperture, and I've remapped the dial which I'm using to scroll here onto the shutter, and that's how I like it, but it's purely down to personal preference. Now the camera is set up to how I like it to be, I'm going to show you how we can control exposure with this incredibly harsh sunshine. We don't get this in England, so it's not so much of an issue. In fact, I've only ever seen the sun twice in my life in England. Now I've got my shutter set to 1/60th, as you can see here. The lens is actually wide open at f1.2, and as you can see, complete and utter overexposure, completely blown out. So what I can do is close down the iris to get the exposure that I want, but we have to really close it down all the way. In fact, even at f16, it is still, unfortunately, still too bright. So I'd have to change the shutter, which is not what I want to do to get the exposure. I think 1/200th of a second to get my exposure. If I half press the shutter button, I can get my metering reading, which says it is just slightly under the perfect metering exposure, which is what you want to try and do. Try and underexpose slightly if you can, because once you've overexposed and lost the detail, you can't bring it back. But if you underexpose a little bit, you can still bring that detail back. Now, I've got the lens completely stopped down, which means I've got a really deep depth of field. I haven't got the shutter at what I want. This is not ideal. So how can you get past this? This is what I use. This is a fader ND, or you can get a Vari ND, does the same thing, and what you do is just screw it onto the front of your lens. Here we go. Now, what I can do is change my shutter to 1/60th if I want to open up my iris, so I can get a nice shallow depth of field, something like you know, if I want to go all the way, let's go to f1.2. Now, with the fader ND, I can control the amount of light coming in. These are effectively sunglasses for your camera, but not just normal sunglasses. These are sunglasses which you can turn the dial on to make them brighter or less bright. So simply by turning the dial, I'm able, let me just check the exposure on that, slightly over. So even at f1.2 and 1/60th of a second, using this fader ND, I am able to get perfect exposure. But if I want to get more light to come in, I just turn it, and there we go. It's completely overexposed again. This fader ND will cut down the light coming into the camera from between 2 stops to 8 stops. Now that's a really huge range simply by one simple device going onto the front of your camera. So as you've noticed, the sun has gone in. Now normally you'd adjust the exposure using the iris, and now if you try and do that, what happens is you get this jumpiness because it's not a smooth change of aperture, and that is again where the fader ND comes in really handy, because we can do some very nice simple adjustments of exposure by turning the dial until we get it spot on. A really worthwhile investment is a matte box, and it doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. I've got the Genesis matte box on here. It works on lots of cameras, but it's a perfect weight and size for this camera. So breaking down the matte box, at the front here we have a French flag, and we use this to stop lens flares coming into the actual lens. We have something here which is called the nun's knickers, and what the nun's knickers do is when you have a filter in here, it stops light coming from this way, hitting the actual filter and bouncing back into the lens. So it creates a perfect light seal. Now we have 2 filter trays in this. We have one here, which is a rotating one, and we have another one there, which is a fixed one, which I have down here for the moment. In here, I have a polarizer. A polarizer is a very good filter to get, because what it does is it can darken the sky for you, but also increase the saturation, bring out the richness in certain dull areas, but it can take away some of the sparkle out of the sea, and this is something you cannot replicate in post. This needs to be done optically only. Now in my other tray I have something called antique suede, so I'm going to put this in front of the polarizer, lock it down, and what we have, kind of appropriately as we're in Florida, a very sort of CSI Miami look straight off optically. That's using the antique suede, and there's loads of other effects you can get with filters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the antique suede out, and I'm going to change that for a clear ND 0.6 soft grad. As you can just about see, it's slightly darker on the top and it's clear down the bottom. So as you see, as I put the filter in, watch the sky as it slightly darkens, but the exposure on the actual beach stays the same. It's really useful, especially on those really grey days when the sky is really boring. It can just bring down that exposure perfectly for you, and that is the ND filter. As I say, there's loads of different optical effects out there, many of which can be replicated in post, and if you do them optically, then you have to remove them. But many of these things look so much better when done optically. Now, a big problem you're going to have when using the matte box is you can't use your Very ND for a very simple reason. You don't have access to it because you've got filters stopping your hands getting in there. You have your nun's knickers stopping getting it there. So what you have to do is you have to use ND filters in your trays. I've got one here. It's a very strong 1.2. I'm going to put it in, and as you see, that darkens the image a lot. So I open my iris up, and we can get exposure adjusted to that ND. It's more fiddly than using a Very ND because you don't have the ability to change the amount of ND strength. It's just fixed with that filter, but you really don't have an option. What I love about shooting with digital SLRs is the ability to use some really lovely lenses on. And what I'm going to do here is go through my selection of lenses. Now, you don't need to have all of these. I've just got the whole gamut because I love the ability to go from really, really wide to really long length. I'm going to show you the effect of the same scene shot on all these different lenses. And I'm starting off here with a fisheye 10mm. As you can see, I can actually see Scott, who's shooting on the right hand side of frame, and I can just about see Den's right leg. If he just waggles his right leg for me, Den, there it is. Now that is very, very wide. I mean, he is sort of way out of frame as far as I can see. I can barely see him on the periphery of my own vision. I can just about see him, but on this lens, it's definitely picking him up. That is a fisheye. It's a lovely effect. If you start moving it around, you can see the distortion though that it creates. It's a very stylized lens, but a lovely addition to your lens bag. I've now got on the Tokina 11-16, and so it's slightly less wide than the 10mm, and we no longer have that fisheye effect. We still have some distortion, but nowhere near as much. And the great thing about this lens is it does have a slight zoom on, as you can see, not a huge amount, but a little bit, and the aperture stays the same at f2.8. This is called a constant aperture zoom lens, and this one is specifically designed for cameras like this which have the APS-C sensor. I'm going to show you what happens when I put this on a full frame sensor now. What I've done now is I put on the Canon 5D Mark II with the Tokina lens. Now the 5D Mark II is a full frame sensor camera, whereas the 7D has something called an APS-C sensor. It's a smaller sized chip in there. Now what happens when you put a lens designed for the APS-C sensor on, you get this effect. We get this very, very large vignette. Now on this lens we can zoom in and we can lose it, but you're losing the whole benefit of having a zoom lens. So when buying a lens for your camera, your 7D, if you're not going to swap between the 5D and the 7D, you're okay. But if you are going to do that, make sure you don't buy APS-C lenses for full frame cameras. They are designed for the crop sensors. Now on here now, I have the Canon L series 24mm f1.4, a very, very lovely lens and really quite expensive. And I bought this for the Canon 5D Mark II because it's a nice wide lens. On the 7D, as you can see, it's not hugely wide, and that is down to the crop sensor of the 7D. The sensor is smaller than the 5D Mark II. Basically, you have a magnification that you have to do on the lens to get the equivalent focal length that you would have on a 35mm full frame camera. So this 24mm becomes 38.4 equivalent. You have to do that on every single lens that you buy to work out exactly what that will be in 35mm terms. Tilt shift lenses are generally made to capture architectural photography, so you can make lines straight when you're looking up at things, but they do give a really nice effect like I'm doing right now, simply by putting it on your camera, and you can move it around and you can change the shot and the focal plane from left to right instead of forward to backwards, simply by turning this dial here and changing the focus. It's a lovely effect lens, but it needs to be used in moderation. Now, I'm a relatively new convert to the Canon cameras. I have a huge range of Nikon lenses, and you can still use most of them on this camera as long as they have a manual aperture ring. Very simply, if I get Joe to come along here, please. Joe, if you can just put your hand in front of the sensor while I take this off. Very simply, just a very cheap piece of metal which just turns the fitting from Nikon to Canon, and I can use it on this camera no problems. This Zeiss 100mm macro lens is a really high quality lens. It actually has no auto functions on it whatsoever. Some Nikon lenses do have auto functions, but you will lose them when putting them on this camera using this adapter. But in video mode, you don't use your autofocus at all anyway, so it's not a deal breaker. So if you've got that huge investment in lenses that you've already got and you're thinking about, oh, I don't want to have to change all my lenses, if you've got them with the right adapter, you can still use them on this camera. What I've got on here is Canon's most popular lens of all time. It's the 70 to 200mm f2.8 constant aperture. Constant aperture means no matter what you have the focal length set to, whether it's 70 to 200, you do not lose any stops, it stays the same. Now, cheaper lenses with generally longer range and wider range than that often lose light as you go down. The f-stop closes down, but constant aperture stays the same. If you're going to get a zoom lens, look at the constant aperture ones, especially the fast ones like this one, f2.8. This is as fast as you will get with a zoom lens. What's also great about this lens, it has something called EOS, which is image stabilization, and it works in two different ways. First of all, you switch it on and you have option 1 and option 2. Option 1 stabilizes across the X and Y axis, so it's very good when you're shooting handheld. Option 2 is more for tripod movement. When you're doing pans, it can stabilize that sort of shot. And to engage it, you simply half press the button till you feel the motor going and it's engaged and you can start recording. The problem when using a camera with a large sensor is to get those long shots, you really need some really large pieces of glass and they are very expensive. A good solution around that is to get something like this. This is the Canon 2x extender. When you put this on the lens, obviously doubles the length, but it also loses you 2 stops. What I'm going to do is I am going to change lenses and put this on. If I get Joe over here, when you do change lenses, make sure you have the camera off, because what that does, it closes the mirror box down, because when you have it on live view mode, the sensor is exposed and you want to try and avoid getting anything on that sensor. So camera's off, I'm taking the lens off. Just put your hand in front of it just for safety. And let's put this back on. That's it. So now we have a 140 to 400. I'm not going to do that in my head, but the graphic on the side is going to tell you exactly what that is going to give me on this camera. So let's turn it back on. So if I go on the long end, which is, here we are now. So although I've lost 2 stops by putting this doubler on, I have gained a huge amount on this lens. At the 200 length with the 2x, I am effectively, with this sensor, at 640mm. Now, if this was a 640mm lens, it would be out there and I'd have to have another support here because it's very big and very heavy. With this doubler, I can get it nice, simply and cheaply. Sure, there is a slight image quality loss, but you don't really see it in the video mode. You do see it in the stills mode somewhat, but in the video mode, not at all. All you do lose is 2 stops. Now for a bit of fun, I have borrowed this from our behind the scenes cameraman, Jag35's Jehu Garcia. It's a 100 to 400mm lens. It's not constant aperture, it's f4.5 to 5.6, so when you're on the 400mm end, it drops down to 5.6. Now what I'm going to do, with the help of Joe again, is I'm going to put the doubler on this and make it, on the long end, a ridiculous 1,280mm. You ready? So let's, tell you what, hold that. I'll take this bit off. I'm going to take the lens cap off and put it on. I'll do that if you take that. Okay, thank you very much, Joe. So I am 1,280mm, and I didn't even see this shot with my eye, and there's a lady who's applying sunscreen onto her body, which is probably appropriate because I've not done that myself. Shows you just how long this lens is, and if we compare it to the shot we did earlier with the doubler on the 200mm, we can clearly see the house the other side of the bay. I love it, it's fantastic. It is so long, I'm pretty sure that's, yeah, that is Big Ben. I can see Big Ben in London on this lens. It's amazing. And if this really was a 12-82mm lens, it would be probably all the way out there and be an enormous weight. This is great, and I'm going to keep this lens. Thanks very much, Jehu. support for the camera is really important, and let's start off with the tripod. Now, just because this is essentially a stills camera does not mean you should use a stills tripod. Do not use a stills tripod. Spend some money and get a nice video tripod with a lovely fluid head. This is one I think works really well with this camera. It's the Miller Solo. It's got a DS20 head on it. The DS10 head will work fine on it. It's got carbon fiber legs on it. It goes very high and it goes very low. And more importantly, it has very smooth movement on the pan and tilt head. Again, don't get a photographic tripod. Another good option, but obviously not as stable as a tripod, but great for quick maneuverability, is the monopod. And this is a very good monopod because it has lovely feet at the bottom, which gives you that extra stability. It does actually have a video head on it, not the best video head in the world, but it still is a video head, so you can do some nice movement with it. But it is pretty stable and you can get some pretty nice locked off shots with it. Now, shooting handheld with this camera is really not very good. It's very difficult to keep it stable. And what I tend to use is Zacuto's support. And this is the tactical shooter. And if I use it with this, the Z Finder, this is my favorite way of shooting handheld, because what it does, it gives me 1, 2, 3, 4 points of contact on my body to give me very stable shots. And this is what I used when I filmed in Dublin handheld. This is another option from Zacuto. This is their rapid fire, and you're still getting 4 points of contact. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And it works very well. But for longer handheld shots, it is nice to have that handle to give you that extra stability, but you can just about get away with having both hands on the actual body. And it is useful because then you can change the iris and the shutter with your right hand quite easily, and of course still focus with your left. When using all of these different types of support, it's important to get the same quick release plate on all of the different things so you can easily go from one to the other. I've got the Manfrotto 394 plate. It goes on my tripod, it goes on my quick release plate of the Zacuto grip, and of course it goes on my monopod. You don't want to keep switching plates between it. Have a nice quick release plate so you can go from one to the other really fast. A very cool part of this camera is the fact that you can record at different frame rates. You're not just limited to 1080p, 30p. You can record at lovely cinema-friendly 24p. You can record at EU broadcast-friendly 25p, as well as 30p. And it also does lovely 720, 50p and 60p. A lot of people like to shoot at that frame rate if they're shooting sports, because the film frame rate of 24 and 25p are a little bit jerky for fast action, but the 50p and 60p is a lot smoother. Personally, I think it looks too much like video, but what I do love doing is changing that into slow motion, because it does have a really powerful effect. To get the different frame rates, we're going to the menu, go to our fourth one along, and select movie record size, select that, and we have our full HD options of 30 and 24, our 720p option of 60, and our standard definition, which we will ignore. Now, if we want to record in 25p, we need to come out of that, scroll along, change the video system to PAL, scroll back, and we now have the option of 25 and 24, and we've lost 30p, and we've lost 60p to be replaced by 50p. A great feature of this camera is the 720p, 50p and 60p mode. Now, it's very good for getting sort of like sports where there's lots of motion and the film look isn't quite right, but what I love using it for is slow motion. I'm shooting 720p, 60p. Now, to the eye, I've got Von Marie in the water, and what I'm going to do is record it at 60p and then slow it down the edit and show you just how different it looks. Okay, are you ready? A little bit more to your right. That's it there. This is the golden hour. It's the most beautiful time to film in, but it goes pretty fast. I'm sure it's like a golden 10 minutes. If you can move to your left again, please. I'm going to get you to come closer and just walk along. That's it there. Stay there. Okay, and when you're ready, just walk straight across. That was it, wasn't it? So this is the shot of Von Marie, 60p normal speed. And this is the same shot slowed down to 30p in Cinema Tools, and I'll show you how to do this later on. Pressure of time. The sun is going down and down and down and down and down. We've only got Von Marie today. We've got another day's filming to do. So you really, you know, in an uncontrolled environment like this, you have to get it right, really. You don't have infinite number of takes. Well, unless we came back tomorrow and did the same thing. So we've got perfect light, we've got the perfect scene, we've got the star, and finally we got the shot, but it took about 6 attempts. So yeah, not easy. When using a digital SLR, one of the biggest limitations is sound recording. Now you can record sound on here. We do have the built-in mic. We have got a Rode mic on top, which is going into the camera using a simple stereo 3.5mm jack. But we have no way of monitoring. We have no headphone jack and we have no meters on there at all. So we have no idea that sound is being recorded. The only way we know that sound has been recorded is by rolling for a bit. Hello, 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 hello. Stopping it, playing it back. Press play. Hello, 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 hello. Hey, I recorded sound. But that sounds pretty crappy to me. Now, how do you get around this? There are a number of ways you can do that. You can get some XLR input devices. XLR is the industry standard for the audio input. Now, these devices do have headphone jacks on them, so sound is going in, but you have no idea that it's been recorded until you play it back. So what is the best solution? The best solution is this, as far as I'm concerned, and that is recording sound separately. I'm using the Zoom H4n, and I'm going to show you a demonstration of just how simple it is to record sound using one of these. So what I've done is I've put a wireless microphone on Von Marie. As you can see, or can't see because I've hidden the microphone, I really dislike seeing microphones. So what I've done is we've hidden it inside her dress, and we've got the wireless receiver plugged into the Zoom. Headphones on, nice and important, especially as we can't use it on the 7D. And what I'm going to do is just get Von Marie to give me a very simple sound check on the camera mic, just to gauge just how poor it sounds, please.
Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Check 1, 2, 3, 4.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit record on the Zoom. Do remember to hit record on the Zoom and the camera. Very important to have them both going. I've messed up loads of times. So make sure it's going and it's not on pause. And what we're going to do is we're going to get a nice sync point by bringing a clapperboard in.
How to record sound, take 1.
Now you could just simply clap your hands, but as we've got a clapperboard, it always looks nicer anyway. So, Von Marie, if you can just give me a nice sound check so we can compare how much nicer this sounds.
Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Check 1, 2, 3, 4.
Much nicer. So what we're going to do now is she's going to read a passage to us. I'm going to record it from this angle and about another 5 angles and cut them all together.
If some lives form a perfect...
When using external mics like the Rode video mic plugged into the 7D, it is very, very important to make sure that it's actually powered on. If it's plugged in and not powered on, you're going to get mute pictures because the internal microphone switches off when an external input is plugged in. Trying to sync your video to the audio with no reference audio on your 7D is going to be a massive pain, so do make sure you have it. Also, every time you button on and off, create a new sync point. This also creates a new file on both the Zoom and the 7D, and you can label them and get them all synced up very easily in post by doing that. If you use Final Cut Pro like me, I really recommend getting a plugin called Pluralize from singularsoftware.com. It does all your syncing for you within Final Cut Pro automatically. It really is a massive time saver. That's great, and we're going to cut there. Okay, let's have a look at this then. What I wanted to do with this piece was actually do something completely off the cuff. There was no storyboard or shot list. All it had was a simple idea of just reading a passage and making a simple short out of it. I'm going to do two different shots of you here. First off, it's going to be the sort of the silent non-sync stuff, and then I'm going to get another angle of you going through the lines. Now, the problem we had there is there was a lot of other noise going on. So what I'm going to do once I finish shooting this entire sequence is record something called a buzz track, and that is basically going to be 1 minute of just natural sound which I can underlay. In fact, because it's actually a minute long, I'm probably going to record 2 minutes of natural sound just so I can even out all of this strange noise, because we have planes, we have swings, we have boats, and it just makes it so much easier to edit. Otherwise you're going to find that the sound on each take isn't going to quite match. Much better. Nice foreground detail. Ow! I just got hit by a stingy thing. This reminds me of when I went to Joshua Tree with some friends of mine and I got done by the cactus. Ow! Right. That hurt. Filming is a dangerous thing. To get done again here. It's a nice shot, and I'm going to make it work even if it means I draw blood. Okay, yeah, that's better. Let's check focus with my Z finder. It's a great thing about the strap is you can just have it on here. That's lovely. But the problem, of course, is with the LCD being fixed, it means I have to crouch down and look into the Z finder, so I often take it off on these sort of shots where I find it quite awkward to get it right. Okay, we're just rolling a little bit more onto non-sync. Okay, put that down, level off. That's nice. Yeah, a little bit more profile towards me, that's nice. And we're gonna, if you can just flick your hair on the right hand side a little bit more away from the face so you can see more defined edge of your profile. That's it, like that, lovely. Perfect, thank you. Now I haven't got a jib with me because the excess baggage would have been really probably about $2,000. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to do a pseudo jib effect by simply using a wide lens, getting close up to an object and create some movement in it. So what I'm going to do is get Marie to do the wistfully looking around type stuff again. That's cool. Just check my focus on you. I do have a very deep depth of field, but I still need to make sure that my focus is correct. And I'm going to go for a pseudo jib shot here, and off we go. That is the end of that sequence. And this is what it looks like all cut together.
If some lives form a perfect circle, others take shape in ways we cannot predict or always understand. Loss has been a part of my journey, but it has also shown me what is precious. So has love, for which I can only be grateful. But in the final days of one's life, one begins to reveal an unknown side of his psyche. Finally perceiving that if we are to live life in harmony with the universe, we must all possess a powerful faith in what the ancients used to call fatum, what we currently refer to as destiny, a tapestry of events that culminate in an exquisite, sublime plan. But be it as it may, those of us who did make it have an obligation to build again, to teach to others what we know, and to try with what's left of our lives to find goodness and immortal felicity.
Now this camera records using a CMOS chip. CMOS chips are very common in modern video cameras. What they used to be were CCD chips, and the way this affects us is CMOS, it tends to be more light sensitive than CCD. But the downside is the way the image is captured by the electronic shutter. With CCDs, has a thing called a global shutter. It captures each frame individually at a time. With the rolling shutter of CMOS chips, it captures it from the top all the way down to the bottom, and that causes problems with certain cameras, in particular this one. What I'm going to show you now is I'm going to pan my camera left and right, and as you look, you can see the verticals are no longer vertical on that building. And that is because as I'm moving the camera, the image is capturing from top to the bottom. So by the time it gets to the bottom, the image is slightly in a different position than when we started. And there's something you need to bear in mind when shooting with a CMOS camera like this, is it is very susceptible to the rolling shutter artifacts. Before we go into night shooting, I want to do a little bit about shooting under artificial light. And that all comes down to the electricity supply of the country that you're in. We're in the States and the supply here is 60 Hertz. In most of Europe, it's 50 Hertz. Now, the way that affects your camera is down to the shutter speed. So at the moment I'm filming this ice cream shop and I've got some flickering of the lights, as you can see. And the reason this is happening, I've changed the camera to 24p and I've set the shutter to a number which is not a divisible of 60 Hertz. And we can see that flickering. So if I drop the shutter down to 1/60th of a second, which will match the frequency of the electricity supply, you'll notice the flickering has now gone. Now, if you're shooting in Europe, at 30p, you really need to try and keep the shutter either at 1/50th or 1/100th of a second, which is a divisible of that country's electricity supply of 50 Hertz. So it really just comes down to just playing around with the shutter, seeing what flickers and what doesn't flicker, and adjust the shutter accordingly. The great thing about these video DSLRs is the ability to shoot at night. They are so good in low light. At the moment, I'm actually set, bizarrely, to ISO 100. That's mainly because I've got a 1.2 50mm lens on here and we have a very bright light source. Now, when shooting at night, I really don't recommend going over 1600 ISO, because if you do anything higher than that, you do start to see a lot of noise. Now, if you really needed to see something, now sure, go higher than that if you want to do some night vision, stuff like that, or it's more actuality based, you didn't care so much about the perfectly clean image, sure, go higher. But for the general shooting, I would say 1600 ISO max. Now, I'm a big fan of time-lapse, and this camera doesn't do video time-lapse like your video camcorder will do. What you need to do is use the still function of this camera and take a series of still images and join them together. And to do that, you need to get remote control, and this is the TC80N3. And what I've done is I have set it to interval record, and I set it to take one picture every 2 seconds. And I've got the shutter slowed right down to stay open for 2 seconds. So literally it's going to be taking one picture at a time constantly. And what it's going to do is going to accumulate light so it looks way brighter than it actually is. And hopefully we're going to get some nice streaks of cars going through. So all I need to do now is click on start and hope for the best. And off it goes. So it's taking one picture at a time in RAW mode. And I've got the fisheye 10mm f2.8 wide open, and I've got the ISO down right to 100 because when you've got the frame accumulation, the slow shutter, you're able to have a really low ISO, which means a really clean picture. So I'm going to keep this going for about 10 minutes and put them all together, and hopefully we'll have a really nice time lapse. Now, if you really wanted to, you could do this in video mode, but the max you can do is record for about 12 minutes because it has a limitation on the card of the file size of 4 GB per clip. And that does equate to about a 12-minute HD clip, whether you're shooting in full HD or 720. So that's not very long time lapse, and it doesn't take advantage of the slow shutter that you can get when shooting in still frames. So the key things to remember: take it out of video mode, put it into photo mode here, make sure you're in RAW mode so you get the best quality possible, and very simple tips: make sure you've got enough space on your card and make sure you've got enough battery life in that. You don't want it rolling for like 5 minutes and you want to get a half-hour time lapse and it stops and you want to have to start again. So loads of space on card, nice juicy battery, and put it into photo mode and you should be able to get some really nice time lapse. So here's the resulting time lapse I did that evening. And here's some really interesting time lapse that I did later with really long exposure of 30 seconds to pick out the stars.